forward just because we're in here.
It's 8:01, and we were scheduled to start a minute ago, so I think, Harold, I think what we'll do to start it off, we have 6 out of the 7 council members and candidates for city council up in the dais, and then I've asked Harold to come up and just kind of give us a preview of what we can expect for the week and a little bit of background on the budgeting process. So Harold, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, District Council-elect. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, tomorrow, and Wednesday morning. I just wanted to take a brief moment. Staff's been working hard getting ready for this week. I just kind of want to talk about where we're at in the process, maybe what some of the expectations are and what some of the next steps will be. Typically, this would be tours that we would actually go around through the departments and see different things. The department heads have been directed to answer a few different questions for the council and for the public. Those being, what did you do with last year's budget? What are you doing with this year's budget? What are you asking for in next year's budget and why? And in addition, what did you see or observe from the community survey results here recently that you're including in your budget and your priorities going forward? And then with the police and fire, as was discussed at a recent council meeting, both chiefs are prepared to discuss through this budget process the results of the CPSM study and how they're prioritizing those needs and addressing those within their budget requests as well. Due to some of the time constraints this year with schedules and different things, we will not be taking you to all the departments. We typically don't. We try to get out of the formality of this room and get you out in amongst the staff during this week. But this year, we're not going to be able to do that for sake of trying to consolidate time for schedules and those kinds of things. So we'll be doing a very high-level discussion. We are not, as staff, prepared to get into a line-by-line discussion of the budget. What we're doing is, again, we're answering those major questions for you so that you can help us prioritize later this week what are your high priorities, and then the staff and I will work over the coming weeks in preparing the city manager recommended budget and bringing that forward to you. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the process. This is designed to be a very interactive process. So as we go through the presentations, we do want you to feel informed, at least at a high level, of what you're seeing so you can help provide us some direction as far as what your priorities are going forward as we continue to move forward with the budget process. There will be a few that we will take you out of the room and out of City Hall to go see some things specifically, but the bulk of the next 2.5 days will more than likely be in here. You should have a schedule for today. We'll provide you a schedule with tomorrow. The big one tomorrow will be Public Works for most of the day. And tomorrow we definitely will be taking you off-site. We'll provide transportation and those kinds of things, but we'll take you off-site to see some specific projects and locations and those kinds of things. But most of today will be in here. We do have a city council meeting tonight. We will be talking about the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, specifically this evening in an open session as part of the regular council meeting. And as always, if you have any questions about the budget that you need to, our goal today is to have you be as informed as we possibly can. Over the next several weeks and couple months, our goal is to answer every question that you have with regards to budget and make sure that you're comfortable that when we get to the end, where we turn this over to you and you make your final changes and approvals, that you're comfortable with where the budget is at, or at least comfortable having a conversation as fellow council members with each other of what that budget should be over and above the work of staff. So I'm trying to think if I've missed anything else that I wanted to talk about today. I can't think of anything else. So with that, are there any questions for me right now about process? After we get done this, we will be, so Wednesday morning, so as for the next 2 days, if you can take notes of what you're hearing and what your priorities are, Wednesday morning will be an opportunity for the council and the potential candidates, well, not potential, the candidates to have a discussion and provide me and the management staff priorities of what you want to see considered in the budget, things that you definitely want in, things that you don't want out, or that you don't want in there, or different priorities. And then I will begin the process with staff as far as preparing the city manager recommended budget, which will include each department will have a meeting with me and the finance staff. We will go through their budgets line by line using a zero-based budget approach, which means that all expenses have to be justified. We're not just rolling over what we spent last year into this year and adding to it. Every expense will have to be justified in every position. And then my plan is to bring that recommended budget back to the council at the July 15th city council meeting. And then we'll work with the council president, Alderman Pittner, to prepare his recommended budget to the council. And then it'll be turned over to the body to make any final tweaks and do final approvals before we have to submit to the state, which will be late September-ish, early October timeframe. So plenty of time for a lot of discussion and conversation. We look forward to it as staff. This is probably one of the most important processes we participate in and take on throughout a year. One other key point I'll add is another change we're making this year is not only are we asking staff to prepare the 2025 budget, we're asking them to look forward and begin kind of a preliminary look at the 2026 budget as well. So we're starting to transition into a 2-year budget process as opposed to just a single-year budget process, hoping that that'll help us pay more attention to the trends and future pressures, and that we can come up with a more cohesive budget approach that's more sustainable for the future. So with that, if there's no questions of me at this point, although I'll be around, feel free to ask any questions. Anything? If not, I'll turn it over to Chief Klug, who will talk about the police department budget. I forget one other thing. Another change we're making this year is we are preparing budget videos for each department. Some of that will be interlaced through our presentations today and tomorrow. But we'll also be using some of the content from today and tomorrow to finalize those budget videos, which will then be made available publicly on our website so that the citizens can see and understand the basics of what we're doing, what we're asking for, and why by department. And I want to give Jennifer Clean and her staff a shout out. They've been working very diligently on beginning to prepare these budget videos, and we hope that's an added component of transparency and education publicly for the community of Minot.
I don't know if there's a safe place to put that, but we'll try that. Good morning, Mayor, council members, and council candidates. Hoping today that I can provide just a basic overview of what our budget is, what it consists of, and kind of what our idea is as we move into 2025. And I'll apologize in advance for my dabbing my forehead. I had a little run with, I think, food poisoning yesterday, so just getting over that. So I think I need to count on Jen to advance slides, so I will just give her the... So you'll see that this year it's going to be very similar to what I presented last year. And I think the main takeaway from that is not much changes year to year in the police department. I mean, we try to shift technology, we try to shift what our focus is going to be and how we're going to proceed through the year. But otherwise, when you look at the police department operation, typically it runs the same year to year with just the change of how we're doing our work. So I put in front of you, that's our executive staff. They're the ones that I count on to keep me informed on what's going on within the department. The 3 captains all report to me, and then Lieutenant Shane Haug is our professional standards lieutenant. He does all of the background checks, anything that has to do with just internal investigations, maintaining a professional standard within our department. So that's his role now. So if there's ever an issue in one of those departments, or you hear a complaint in one of those departments, those are generally the places you can start to get your answers. Next slide, Jen. So I didn't put 2025 up here, and that was intentional. Usually I have a guess of where I'm going to be. This year I don't really have that. We're a couple weeks ahead of where we were last year going into this. I think it was the 16th when we were doing these. So just trying to piece everything together, make sure I have an accurate number before I put any guess on there. The one thing on last year's that I focused on this slide was personnel and personnel needs. And that's one thing that I took out this year. In my mind, it's unrealistic for me to anticipate adding staff. And I also don't exactly know what I need to add. And a lot of that has to do with, we've been running at about 80 to 85% effective strength for the last at least 5 years. So trying to figure out what number of officers we need when we haven't been fully staffed in the first place makes it difficult to try to put a number on, okay, I'm gonna ask for more people. Yeah, I've got a plan, and if I implemented that plan as I presented last year, I would need more people. But I also need to be fully staffed before I can do that. So back up for just 1 minute, thank you. So you'll notice that on average, our budget is 87% of our budget is just personnel costs. That doesn't leave us a lot of fat on the bones for operational expenses, but I think we do pretty well. We keep our officers and our staff equipped, keep them up to date with some of the more advanced technology and ways of doing business in the police world. And that came out in the CPSM study. They put a note in there that it basically said, as compared to departments this size across the nation, this is something that Minot PD is doing really well. They're making sure they're staying on top of the most current ways of doing business. They're keeping up with technology. And all of those things make a difference in how effective we are. So the one thing I'll say about staffing is, I talked about, for the last at least 3 years in my presentation, I've talked about effective assignment of personnel. And I talked a lot about reassigning law enforcement where they belong on the street and putting civilian positions in the office because they can do that job. And that was another point, and I'll cover it briefly here. We'll touch on it again later because it's gonna go full circle, and I'm gonna conclude with what the CPSM study and recommendations said. Keeping in mind there's 78 items that they recommended. Came close, but I don't think I have all 78 in my presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about it, and that was their recommendation too. It was, the record, our evidence techs, our record staff that are sworn, those should be reassigned. We should hire civilian, put those back on the street where they belong, find more effective use. Next slide. So just some major projects, talking about what we've done over the past years, how we've spent our money. A lot of 2022 was just expanding and modernizing our technology. We upgraded our Axon platform, our agreement with them, so we added some various technology advances. We have our drones, we have our interview rooms, we have sensors on vehicles that can detect if lights are turned on, guns are taken out, any of that kind of thing. So it'll automatically turn body cameras on. And sometimes that's one thing that many chiefs, many councils ask is the cost of Axon worth it? And in my opinion, it is. I think it's saved us probably what we have spent. It probably saves us in frivolous lawsuits. Generally speaking, people come in, they say, hey, this is what happened. We pull up the video, it's not, we show them, and it kind of ends it. And it's not that they're lying, it's just what they recall, what the video shows, and what we recall. So that technology has gone a long way, saved a lot of departments, and I think it's also done that for us. Of course, in 2023, we started looking at our building space as City Hall relocated, and my discussions with the city manager were, he recommended, hey, does this building even fit the needs of what the department needs for future use? And I'll get into that a little bit later. I'll bring up EAPC's portion of that with their space needs analysis and study. And I'll just touch on it very high level, but just touch on it and give you a little reminder on what that all said. Our fleet updates for patrol and investigations. We started to fall behind. One of the easy places when you don't want to cut personnel is vehicles. So if we needed to save, $40,000, we could cut a vehicle. Problem is that meant we weren't replacing them at the level that we were anticipating, and we started to hit high mileage. Once you get a car on our department over 100,000 miles, it's not running real well. And even with the maintenance, we take them to the shops at Public Works, and they do an excellent job of keeping our vehicles maintained. But even with that, when they're city miles, day in, day out, almost 24/7, it's not the same as just driving your car from your garage and going shopping and going to Bismarck and doing whatever. So a little bit different. Mental wellness. Of course, at the end of 2022, when we lost an officer, we started to take a look at how do we take care of our own a little bit better? What do we do to take care of our department? What do we do to take care of our officers? And Officer Blanchard was a great example of how we maybe missed something and how we could do things better. But he's also that constant reminder to us that we need to do better and how we can accomplish that. So last year, that was a big focus. I'll go into that a little bit more. And moving into next year, one of the key takeaways from the CPSM study was they talked a lot about intelligence-led policing, and that is kind of the future of law enforcement. That's kind of where we're at now. A lot of that is built off of a lot of technology, a lot of different concepts. So we have to manage that because everything comes with a price tag. But there are some things, there's some, I guess, low-hanging fruit, for lack of better terms, that I think we can reach out to and we can try to implement to just advance our department a little bit and take that model of intelligence-led policing where we're actually looking at what's going on in the community, and those are the areas that we're focusing on. We're not just kind of throwing people out there and hoping for the best. So we will take a little bit closer look at that as we move into the 2025 budget, and I'll go into one concept a little bit later. Next slide. So our dispatch center, I don't have any requests at this point other than maintaining our personnel and budget. Our new center opened in 2023. I think the key thing that we learned through this process, and especially when COVID hit, was we need to do a better job of preparing for equipment replacements. We can't wait for it to burn out and there's another one on the shelf we can take down, or we just gonna take a day to get here. That world doesn't exist in technology anymore. So we just have to do a better job of taking all the new equipment we have in that center, making sure we're tracking what the expected life is and not waiting for it to go down. Just take care of it when the maintenance is no longer good and the recommendation is there. I think we need to plan for that, plan for those expenses and keep that operation running. The other point I wanted to make here, just so everybody understood, was that the cost that goes into that, and I think last year's budget was about $1.9 million. So we split that 65-35 with Ward County, so the city of Minot picks up 65% of those costs, and Ward County budgets the other 35. Next slide. So just going back to the patrol cars, Axon, there's the patrol fleet, and there'll be a point that CPSM talked about increasing our fleet size. Well, they put it as no more than 2 officers per car. That would mean increasing our fleet size. So in doing that, it wouldn't take a lot, but we're already on a 5 to 6 vehicle rotation per year. 5 is where we can generally get by, but that would also might increase that number, depending on the mileage that we see. May increase, may not. Maybe a higher number of vehicles brings that down. We don't know what that looks like, but typically you can look at 5 to 6 per year. The other point is, I think going into actually this year's budget, you saw the patrol cars came in a little bit higher than what we budgeted. We've been pretty close the last several years since 2020 when COVID hit. We've been pretty good at guessing. We were a little low this year. Is really not a good way to find out what that price is going to be until they release it from the factory. So we'll continue to watch our patrol cars. Of course, a couple of years ago, as again, another COVID change, as the shops struggled to keep personnel and mechanics on board, one thing we did was shift the burden of outfitting those vehicles to a company that's based out of Minnesota. And they upfit the vehicles so it comes to us ready to go. So once they get the vehicle done, it's a working patrol car, and they maintain that. So if anything goes wrong, we don't have to pay them to come out and fix that. That's part of what we pay them for. And I would say the advantage is that is what their job is. Our mechanics were good at what they did, but sometimes they had to guess at, okay, this is what the problem is. How do we fix that? And it maybe wasn't the best way, but it did kind of get things done and get us through. Now, the technology that they're putting in, the processes they're putting in are tried and true, and they're working for departments across the country. Axon, I mentioned it earlier. Just wanted to put the number in here because it is a fairly big budget item for us. Our fleet is increasing by about 20,000 as we move into 2025. That'll advance some technology in the vehicles with our in-vehicle cameras as well. So with advancement comes a little cost, but we've been under the same, our agreements with Axon are 5 years, so that locks us into a number for 5 years. And so that 52.5 that you see there, when we enter that in 2025, that'll push us all the way through 2030. Flock was a concept I introduced last year. For those of you not familiar with Flock Systems, it's actually a safety company that it started as residential, kind of a residential camera concept, and it moved into more of a community concept. And it's built off of both license plate reader and video technology. I think when we look at this, it's more about the force multiplier for us and the intelligence-led policing. Those two concepts, when you have video of vehicles in certain areas, when you have license plates that you can check, when you know who's coming and going from your community, and you can link that to criminal activity in other communities. This is something that across North Dakota, I think Fargo's in the middle of looking at it, West Fargo, Bismarck, Grand Forks. We're all looking at the same concept. Ultimately, we can all share that video, we can all share the data. The intelligence goes much further than just Minot. It goes North Dakota, it goes across the country. So technology and small departments that I've seen that are located, much like ours, where we have a number of highways coming through our community, stolen vehicles, criminal vehicles associated with criminal activity, those vehicles can pop up on a hot list. that would tell us that that vehicle's here and we can be a part of either helping solve another community's crime, or if it's our vehicle that we're looking for, we can be a part of that. So there is of course a continuing cost. It's about $3,000 per camera. We think we can start with 10, and might not be the best coverage, but I think with 10 we could prove that this would be a benefit to Minot, and hopefully we can prove it enough that we can increase to by about 5 cameras, go to about 15 cameras in 2026. So that'll be probably the one thing that will repeat in my budget that didn't make it last year, just to take a look at how do we do a little bit better in capturing what's going on in Minot, use that to solve crime in our community. Next slide. So we have a number of special operations that we need to take care of. All of these come with a fairly significant cost. Generally, our SWAT and bomb teams, we get funding through some of the Department of Homeland Security grants to keep some of that up to date. I think that might be on tonight's agenda, the upgrade to the robot for the bomb team will be coming through. And that's what we have to count on, because most of that technology is, $200,000-$300,000 per investment. So we count on the grants for a lot of that. Our peer support is, we call it a special operation, or I put it under special operations, because it really does take a group of people that are committed to taking care of all of us in the department and just being there when we need them. So that was developed throughout between 2022 and the end of 2023, and made a lot of headway on that program. Bike patrol, we try to get them out there in the community as much as possible. We kind of switched that. It used to be a lot of patrol based. We'd put them out at night and we'd see if we could find anybody out just breaking into vehicles, buildings, that kind of thing. It's a quiet operation. We shifted that a little bit more to a community outreach function, putting them downtown during an event, putting them in the parks when there are special events, that type of thing, where they can connect to the community just by riding by them on the bike. So it's to us, it's more of a community outreach function than it is a patrol function. Our crime scene response unit, another area that in the recommendations, a lot of what they pushed it through CPSM was making that a full-time civilian-based unit, and I don't think I can justify that. I don't think I can justify that a number of personnel that are just waiting for the next crime to happen and scene to process. I don't know what that looks like from the larger scheme of things. I think what we do now, using current officers and our patrol-based CSRU, is, I think it's sufficient for what we need. We've had great success with it. Just being able to let the investigators investigate in our crime scene, process crime scene. Next slide. So our focused enforcement team, not really quite a team yet. We only have one person assigned, but I think what we've been able to do with one person shows how important it is. And it was an area that's, again, CPSM commented on, that we should have at least one K-9 and one officer assigned to that team. That isn't our goals. As you can see, right now we have Sergeant Sumlin assigned to that team. And he's been able to kind of connect the dots where patrol gets busy on stuff. They can't always keep all the coordination together to accomplish some of the things we need to. But just somebody that can focus on the areas that all of us get contacted about, those repeat complaints about a problem property, a problem area in Minot. We can put them on that We can assign them to that, and they can try to be creative in how they're going to find a solution. So our goal, and again, going back to when I talked about when do you add more officers, when do you add more staff, until we get up to a normal level, I don't think we'll be there. But this is where I would focus on next. Once we are fully staffed, my next focus would be, okay, now we need to start putting people in these positions, because I think we can do a lot of good work if we focus their attention and we're not just responding to calls. Next slide. So transition to, and there's a lot of information on here, I apologize, but you can blame CPSM. They're the ones that gave me 78 things to consider. I'm going to break these down into things that we're already doing, things that we're already considering or were considering prior to the study, and then there'll be some things that we need to do some more research on. We just don't have the information to know if it's a fit for Minot and if the budget would support it. And so, and it's not to say they didn't see exactly how, it's not that they missed all of these things. Some of these things we were maybe just implementing or just starting to do. A lot of what we focused on at first, once we knew what the purpose of the study was, it was easy to get on board, because we actually wanted somebody that would come in and say, yeah, you should consider this. Yeah, you should consider. It did confirm a lot of things we were looking at. So once we knew that that study was coming, we kind of hit the pause button, let them do their work, and then confirm what we were already looking at, or maybe point us in another direction. So there was good that came out of the study, and it did show us some areas of weakness as well as some of our strengths. So not going to go in depth on all of these, obviously, but when you talk about the policies and directives, we do that. The data, I think some of the information that they gathered might have showed them that, yeah, there's a directive there, and it's still in the directives folder, but it might be the 2023 folder, and they just took that as, oh, well, it's still active. And the good takeaway was just add an effective date and an expiration date. Good information, easy to do, problem solved. So kind of killed two birds with one stone on their recommendations on that. Adding a full-time administrative assistant. Last year we switched a part-time to a full-time, so we have that position in now. I'm not a believer in just adding before I know what their capabilities are, so we'll see what that addition does to help us in records. And it'll talk in a few places it talks about an administrative assistant, adding an administrative person. And I think the key takeaway from that was a lot of the work that myself and the command staff do, just day-to-day work, is stuff that's just repetitive. It could be invoicing, it could be, writing different memos, having somebody that can just take care of those tasks without us sitting and typing out a memo on something that somebody else can do and we can sign off on. So there are a number of things that we can do to free up some of our time so we can focus on some of the bigger issues within the department, some of these other items that are on here. So since we do most of these, I was just trying to see, one of the items that they brought up, and it's brought up several times, is they talk about community service officers. And community service officer is basically somebody that can do a number of things. They might do parking control, animal control, and respond to some of the other small calls. It might be directing traffic at an accident. And in some ways, we already do that. If our animal control are out and we have an accident, we need help with traffic direction, they already go out and do that. The community service officer just focuses a little bit more on doing all of those things at any point in their day. It's not necessarily individual assignments like it is now. So I think we can accomplish that fairly easily. The other area that I plan to focus on in the coming year is with community service officers is utilizing the Skill Bridge program through the military to try to pick up some of the interest to bring them in on the community service officer concept. So they would come in, they'd learn skills. We can't put them in a law enforcement position, so we can teach them basic skills on directing traffic, on handling animals, parking, all those things, and while serving somebody in the military, giving them some skills that will help them transition into a future career. Hopefully, a career where they can apply for officer for our department and move into one of those positions. So that hopefully in 2024 we can get that off the ground and we can start to see some benefits from utilizing that program. And again, there are a couple in here that they talk about using narcotics unit investigation have them use intel-led policing. When I was there many years ago, we already did that. Intel is a huge part of narcotics investigations. So I don't think we need to shift a lot there. But again, it points to the intel-led policing model that is the future of law enforcement and the current day of law enforcement. Next slide. So some of them that we've already done some research and development on, establishing succession planning documents for employees in key positions. Those are things that we've already identified. We just need to get them implemented, developed and implemented. Include effective expiration dates on department directives. Talked about that one. Establish an acknowledgement process for employees receiving those directives. So a lot of these are again, they're kind of low-hanging fruit. They're easy to do. There's not a lot of budget or any budget that goes into them. So we can implement them fairly easily. And again, just looking at this list, there's about 10 items there of that 78 that we can check off just by going through that process. And seek out national leadership training. We've been budgeting that for the past few years. The problem is finding somebody that you can bring in, and the cost that's associated doesn't quite meet what we've been budgeting. So we need to try to fine tune that a little bit to make it more effective. But again, there's a number of items here that we already have on our list to address and hopefully implement in the coming year. Next slide. So this one is a little bit more on just the research and consideration side. There are a number of things that I think we can consider, but I think there are some things that we need to make sure they actually work in our community before we do that. And I think they outline that pretty well in their study when they mention that, hey, just because we're saying it doesn't mean that it's something that's going to work for Minot. They may have written it a little bit better than what I just said, but so how do we get some of those things implemented? Are they necessary? Involving sergeants in low-level internal investigations. I think to some extent we do that, but also, are they talking about a department that has a larger internal affairs unit? I'm not sure. So those are things I think we need to study a little bit to see if we're missing the mark. And after hours emergency process for documenting evidence and property. I wasn't aware we had a problem, so again, we have to research it. We have to figure out, do we have a problem with that? Do staff not know who to call after hours to accomplish that? The increased SWAT training to coincide with National Tactical Officer Association recommendation. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, I think they do 8 or 10 hours a month now, so it's not a big lift to get there, but when you consider there's 16 operators and you have to pay them, most of them would be on overtime. So, you know, there is a cost that comes with that. Again, it's something that, are we missing the mark, or are we just trying to meet the mark that somebody else has set? And does that fit our community? Again, a lot of it is our community size and our needs, and making sure we meet those needs. Next slide. And just a few last ones on that same section. Again, using our RMS's records management system, using it for to track case progress. I think right now they already do a pretty good job. We did some reassignments several years ago that gave our investigations division a little bit more structure from a supervisory standpoint. That allowed for sergeants to oversee a team of investigators and to keep track of their cases and make sure that the paperwork's right, that they're doing something with the cases. There is something in play with cases that are open. So I think they're already doing a pretty good job at that. Not to say we can't look at a possibility here to improve that. We can definitely do that. Just a couple other items that I think we need to, again, we're taking the recommendations seriously. We just want to make sure we just don't jump into a bunch of implementation and not think about the fallout from that. Next slide. And then this slide, I think, is probably from the standpoint of consideration. Most of these items would have a fairly heavy lift when it comes to budget on top of what our needs for those processes are. So engage in a strategic planning process. I agree 100%. There's going to be a cost with that. Convert one captain position to deputy chief. Have to look at that. Be a cost. Explore off-the-shelf solutions to tracking and maintaining internal investigations. We know that exists. We saw some software, and it would help us. It automatically tracks like use of force incidents by officers, so it would flag it for you. You wouldn't have to go back and look at spreadsheets and say, okay, well, let's look at Officer A. Okay, they've got XYZ problems. It would do it for us, and it would tell us that, hey, this person's had 10 use of force incidents in the last 3 months. You might want to take a look and just make sure they're all good. So we know that exists. There is a pretty hefty price tag because they know that it reduces liability on the backside. So can do it. Is the cost justifiable? Strategic planning for property and evidence section, transition to sworn and civilian positions. Again, I think that's something that if I were to make any request right now that a civilian evidence tech, so I could bring that officer back out on the street, would be the one recommendation I would make for a person. Mainly because it gives me another person I can put on the street, and it offsets that position with somebody that's probably going to stay in there longer term and learn that job. Purchase design storage system for property and evidence. Some of you have had the opportunities to come down, look at our evidence storage areas. You know it's less than desirable, but we try to keep it in the best shape we can given the space we're working with. We know there are systems out there. We have one installed in that area. And yeah, once we know what the future of our building looks like, we might have a better idea what do we need to do. Temporary task force dispose of unneeded property and evidence. I think they've done a good job lately of cleaning that up. So I don't know if that's necessary. Formal property room audit. Agree. I think once we know what the future of our department, and they even mentioned that in one part of their study, is once you just figure out what your building looks like, then do these steps. And a lot of it focused on the property and evidence side. Consider an online reporting for report-only calls. We're looking at what does Bismarck do? What does Fargo do? Fargo especially, they use the same records management system we do, so how does that implement right into our records management system? Makes it a little easier to know if it does a good job or not. So, and I take some of that, and it's one of the considerations I have is, will our community be satisfied with just going online and filing that report? And to some extent, that might just be where we're at. We don't have enough officers to commit. But if they are satisfied with doing that, it's not to say that we would say, well, we're not going to take your call, you have to do it this way. But it does give them the option of, hey, I just need to report this for my insurance company. I can go on here, I can file that report. If it falls into the right category, and I'm done, and the insurance has what they need, and we're all happy. So something we're considering. Again, increase the number of full-time staff in records section. I think we need to look at, again, adding the full-time this year. How does that impact our workload? Consider community service officer position. I think we've had conversations the last couple of years. Seeing that in the report does give us a little bit more direction on that. I think it's something we need to look at a little closer, and also I think implementing it initially through the skill bridge and trying to bring some of the military in to fill those positions and learn a skill and hopefully transition to our department might be the best way to do that. Less lethal munitions, some of those things we have the capabilities of, we just don't have it trained to the level that they think it's necessary. Assign no more than 2 officers to each patrol vehicle. Again, that would take increasing the fleet size to make sure that we had the right number of cars to accomplish that. And then assign 1 investigator to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. That would, again, that was a budget request for one of the officers I requested a couple years ago. I don't think without adding, I don't think our current investigations can handle 1 more assignment. Next slide. So, police headquarters. The image that's up there is our current design and layout, and a lot of the focus was on looking at the colors that are within that design and trying to get the colors to be in the same area. So that really, and then do we have the right space for each section of the department within that current footprint? Next slide. So we were able to work with EAPC to develop a potential solution. It did create a part of our operation, our special operations would have to be on the section of land that sits between where us and Joe's Smoke Shop is. That would be a special operations / meeting briefing space. And then the rest of our operation would be in the current footprint. But at the time, the estimated cost of renovating and adding that space was between $46 and $52 million. Next slide. The new construction concept to make make everything work the way it's supposed to would be 62 to 70 million. And broke it down a little bit. When you consider the 62 to 70 million, you actually get a 50-year solution for about 100.8 million. Whereas if we use the current remodel, the current facility, and then build new in 25 years, you're basically looking at what that initial cost was, plus the 70 million plus to get that accomplished. So you're almost doubling, if I remember right. I don't have the figure in here, but I think it almost doubled the cost of a 50-year solution. Next slide. So just a couple final thoughts. Again, much like last year and much like every year, our current personnel are a priority. So making sure that their pay is competitive, their benefits are good, and I think all of that has been in line over the years. The city's done good to support us in that way. Infrastructure needs, obviously our building is old. One of the major, there's actually two major expenses, but I ask for which one needs to go first. Our cooling tower is about $100,000 plus piece of equipment that needs to be switched out, and we're kind of limping it along. We're just waiting for the day that we can't replace a part to keep it going, and there's a boiler that needs replaced, should have been replaced about 5 years ago. And that, again, that's close to $100,000. So trying not to put money into something that might not be the right place, but at the same time, until there's direction, I think we need to fix some of those things, because a department without air conditioning would be a little miserable from time to time. And I think it's important, one way or the other, I think it's important to keep our building running. And then our equipment upgrades and maintenance really is what we count on. Once we have our personnel taken care of, we just have to make sure all of our equipment's in working order and we can keep everything going. So at that, I would stand for any questions.
Are there any questions? Any questions? Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you had mentioned a formal property room audit. What does that look like? What does that consist of? What's the benefit of that?
I think the answer to that, Alderman Pittner, is that I think that would be part of the overall remodel. Everything that we've looked at and through the different designs that EAPC worked through with us, there really wasn't an easy way to accomplish getting our property in one location. Due to the 5 or 6 different levels that exist within our building, it's very difficult to put everything from where it is in one place and have it accessible by the right people at the right time. So I don't know the best way to answer that is. It's probably going to take the bigger conversation about what's the future of the building look like.
Okay. Let me continue.
Paul, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Another item we talked about was national level training. You said it's something we budget for. Is it an option? You talk about bringing someone in for training. Is it an option to send on a rotational basis officers out to receive training, bring training back? What does that look like? Has that been considered?
Yeah, Alderman Pittner, that's been the model that we've used for years. The problem is you can send 2 or 3 people and spend the same amount as trying to bring them in and train 10. So travel is now probably the majority of the cost. And, the training itself, most of the trainings that we send people to, probably around $500 to register for that type of training, maybe more depending on what it is. But to get them there could cost, plus hotel, could be $2,000-3,000. So that's where we really tried to switch that, because when we entered 2020 and COVID limited our travels, we had to come up with a different way to train our personnel. And that was trying to focus on everybody and bring it in so that we didn't have to send anybody. We just had to get one instructor to our department and train us. So we've kind of stuck with that model. The problem is just trying to find something that's, I want to make sure if I'm spending the money, we're getting our money's worth too. So, and we're finding that, like everything, the cost is going up. I think our most recent attempt for a line level training for 3 days to bring them in. And this is if we just tried to focus on our department, would be just shy of $20,000.
Continue, Paul.
Thank you. Chief, you mentioned as well as replacing the evidence tech with a civilian position. If you were to take that sworn officer, where would they go? Where would they try to, patrol officer? You'd mentioned internet crimes against children. Where would you try to put that badge?
Right now, I think I would focus on just putting them on patrol. Really depends. Probably an arm wrestling match between a couple commanders, but we're down 13 officers. So right now, probably patrol until we could reconsider that once we had, the original thought was that would go to the focused enforcement team once we were fully staffed, or once we were staffed enough that we could afford to do that.
Okay, that's all I got.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you talked about using the career bridge kind of approach for some augmentation. I think right now you've got 2 officers in training, I believe. What other approaches are considered, or what are the other prospects for augmenting the force and trying to fill some of those unfilled positions? I mean, as you mentioned, you've been kind of fighting that battle for a handful of years, I think you said. So, any thoughts on that topic?
Alderman Janser, I think most departments in the country are doing exactly what we're doing, and you're kind of throwing darts at the board and you're hoping that something sticks. We're just not, we use the Back the Blue program grant, for example, to incentivize recruitment bonuses. So just incentivizing the current officers with up to $5,000 to bring somebody in. We have not had one successful applicant that way. So it is a challenge. We are considering, we do the recruiting, we do, the job fairs. There's just not a big appetite for this career field right now. There are some thoughts that might change, but I think a lot of that has to do with what's the climate at the time. And I think it's been better, but until we make a full turn, I don't know if that'll change much. So I think it's more about focusing on how do we retain what we have, even if we're building slowly, 2 at a time. How do we retain what we have? What do we need to focus on to make sure that happens?
Lisa?
Thank you. And Chief, you kind of answered this question from Alderman Janser, but I have a citizen that calls me on a very regular basis, and she would pay police officers as much as we possibly could to get us to full force. But what I'm hearing is money maybe isn't the issue, or do you think that if police department staff had a different pay schedule or benefit schedule, would it make a difference?
Alderwoman Olson, I don't know the best way to answer it, but I think we've had people come from departments that make more money, and they've come here looking for something different, or it's the place that they want to live. And I see more people moving because they want to go to a place where my family lives. I want to be closer to family. I want to be closer to home. This is where I've always dreamed of being. So I don't know if there's a clear answer there. I think the one thing that's a little bit scary on the police and fire side is the retirement, and with Indy PERS kind of being that guessing game, and what are we going to do with that? How do we maybe going with the public safety PERS where you don't have a 63-year-old cop coming to your door. You have somebody that's younger coming to your door to solve your problem with that abusive issue. It's just, there are a number of things that we've looked at, and we also talked to a lot of different departments around the country, and everybody's searching for the same thing. And if anybody had that answer, they'd be sitting on the mint right now, because that's the hardest part is, what do you want to do? And is this the place? Is Minot home? So.
And just one follow-up, just for clarification, I think I understand this correctly, but, just for anyone listening, I know that the ND PERS plan changed after legislative action, but I don't believe the emergency plan changed, right? It's still open?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Chief, I have a couple of questions here. First off, you talked about looking towards the goal of 2 people per vehicle. What is our current ratio?
I don't know exactly, maybe 2.5, maybe per. If I had to guess.
So roughly right now, do all vehicles run mostly every day, all the time, give or take officers and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, most of the time, or yeah, and especially in the moments where you either have a vehicle out being changed over or you have one down for maintenance, it'll definitely increase. And if we were fully staffed, we would probably struggle to get. Well, it'd be close. With the vehicles down, you'd probably have every car out of the lot, especially during the day.
Next, you talked a little bit about using civilian employees to replace some of the roles that are currently held by officers. So if we have 13 openings right now, so we add 4 new civilian positions and we would reduce that number of open officers, is that kind of the whole behind this, is just like reshifting current FTEs?
Alderman Burlingame, I don't know if it'd be 1 for 1, but I think there is at least, I think what the best way to answer that, I think we could hold our current level of officers and take some of the pressure. One of the complaints we hear from officers is they get stuck with a lot of like small tasks that maybe their time could be better utilized doing something else. And I don't disagree with that. I think the community service officers are maybe the answer to taking some of the small tasks so that the officers aren't literally running call to call all day long. And they do have some times for some proactive enforcement and a lot of the responses from CPSM were focused on, more of the community policing approach, where you're out and engaged in different conversations and relations with the public that don't have to deal with a call for service. So I think that there's a piece there too that we're maybe missing a little bit, that when the officers are so busy, they don't get that opportunity to just have the lighter side of having conversations with the community. When you go back to the community satisfaction survey, a lot of it was, do you feel safe in different areas? Do you feel safe? They talk about industrial area, commercial areas. I think some of that could change if they weren't all busy all the time and there was more time to interact. If there was a wine walk downtown, just to be down there and interact with people while they're walking around downtown. So I think there are some things that community service officers help to take that burden off of, and also the perception of every time I call, I get a cop. It could, yeah, they're still getting the same service. It just might feel like a different conversation, might be a lighter conversation. I don't know.
So within that, looking at the reports that you give us every time, that'll talk about what openings that exist or officers that aren't on duty is oftentimes injured officers or a lot of officers that are on light duty. Is there a role that officers that are potentially limited because of some sort of an injury can play with some of these jobs that don't necessarily require a badge?
It is Alderman Burlingame, it is a little bit tricky just from the standpoint of we have to make sure that they don't violate anything in their order. So most of what we've seen lately have been surgeries, so there's a fairly low weight requirement for what they can lift, that kind of thing. So in those instances, it's tough to put them in those positions. For example, right now we have one that has just been answering questions in dispatch and take some of the calls when they're busy. They can answer the phone and try to get that handled. So they're able to do that while they're on light duty and relieve some of the burden that dispatch is seeing. Is that they also have staffing shortages. So when we look at that, we try to make sure that we're not just putting them out there in doing anything, but we're finding something that's going to help the department. I'm not saying that the answer is no, but it is difficult in most of those cases.
Sorry, I think only 2 more questions, and then I'll let somebody else talk. But, so you mentioned you wanting to have a designated officer for internet crimes against children. How are we currently handling that issue, or aren't we, or what's our role?
Yeah, currently, we have a couple of investigators that have the ability to do the investigations, but we aren't really doing much for proactive searching, so to speak. We're right now they're just responding to tips that we receive through that task force. So when those tips come in, they'll do the follow-up, they'll do the investigation, but sometimes some communities have a lot more active role and they'll be out searching for predators constantly, and we don't have that capability right now.
My final question, I believe, is, so you talked a little bit about, in answering Alderwoman Olson's question, about obviously just turnover happens, and it's always interesting because you're right, some people just are living lives and move to be closer to family or whatever reason, but there's also a reality that every employer is facing, that people don't necessarily stay in jobs for as long as they used to. And so wondering what kind of policies or procedures you've implemented in order, for lack of a better term, to speed up orientation, to speed up the process to getting people to be a fully capable officer, because we don't have 5 years to do it like we used to, so.
Alderman Burlingame, haven't really been able to speed anything up, and actually, like now, our in-service training on the front end takes longer. We have more technology, we have more processes, just a more complicated environment that we live in. So trying to give them all the skills so they can be successful. Because I think what we don't want to do is sell them short, and then we have somebody that doesn't know exactly what they're doing, they get themselves into trouble, then we're dealing with them and maybe a supervisor that are out due to an action that was taken. So there's a balance of speed versus maintaining confidence that they're going to be able to do the job. I think the focus on our military, especially with Minot Air Force Base having one of the largest security forces operations, is security forces, their training counts as academy time. So we actually only have to put them through 2 weeks, the reciprocity course basically, in Bismarck to get them fully trained and licensed. So I think that's an important piece for us to focus on, because we can cut 10 weeks right there. And I think that's probably, other than just trying to pick them up from other departments, which everybody's competing, so difficult to do, but we've had it happen too, where somebody would rather live in Minot or likes Minot or has a connection here, they'll quit somewhere else and they'll come here. So it's not Minot is a bad place to work. It's just, is it right for me now?
Any other from the council? If not, I'll open it up to the candidates. Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Chief, a couple things for you. You mentioned, I think, that you're down 13 officers from plan, essentially the way that you'd like to see that. So one of the things I wanted to make sure I understood was when I look at the 24 budget, I see 58 officers in there between masters, senior and police. So are the 13 within that 58, or would that be on top of the 58?
They're within that 50.
They're within the
They have to be budgeted for us to fulfill those, so.
Okay, so we would typically budget to plan right now, or to, yeah, I guess if that's the right word for your staffing plan. Is that correct? Okay, sounds good. And then I wanted to talk about the vehicle purchase options a little bit. So you mentioned that, it sounds like inflation's getting you a little bit right now. That can certainly ebb and flow. That's gonna be different over time. Are we so small at this point that locking in longer term contracts we're not really a player in that when we're buying 5 or 6, where a huge department buying 40 might be able to do something like that?
Yeah, typically, the way that works is we put it out for bid. In the past few years, we've not been able to we've just gone with state bid because they'll open it for bids and close it within days. And if we don't hit that narrow window of locking in those vehicles, we won't get vehicles. So we rely a lot on state bid, and realistically, that's probably gonna be the best price we're going to get. But when we've had time, we have opened it up and we've allowed others to bid. Sometimes we get a bid, sometimes we don't. So as far as contracts, I haven't seen anything that allows us, since we do it year for year, I haven't really seen anything that has allowed us to do like, hey, we want to pay this price for the next 3 years or that kind of thing. It's all kind of compete on the same level, which is if you get the bid in and they have enough cars, you'll get one.
Okay. All right, and then I guess one other one, can you talk a little bit more about the flock system and, I guess the perspective that I would bring to it right up front is I'd want to understand what the privacy concerns are for the public. I understand the upside. I get that, oh man, here's a car that, showed up in Detroit and there's a warrant for the person who owns it, whatever, I get that. But how do we balance that with privacy for, essentially mass scanning of vehicles across the city?
Absolutely. So they have a team that makes sure that that's covered really well. In consideration, they would present that and how they accomplish that. In general, those cameras pick up the back of the vehicle, so it's picking up plates, it's not picking up faces and that kind of thing. So we have no idea who's driving the vehicle. It also requires that to query that system, you have to have a case or you have to have some type of investigation. So to go in and say, hey, I want to find, whatever vehicle plate, you would have to say, okay, I'm investigating this case number and this is the vehicle I'm looking for. And then it would list that. So it's not so much that we're just sitting there looking at the data. It gives us the ability to query that data to find, was a vehicle here? Did it cross one of these points during a certain time frame? And privacy is a big part of what they try to accomplish. They try to make sure that the citizen privacy, the vehicle plate, anybody can see a plate driving down the road, so there's not a lot of privacy on that. But they focus on that. They focus on the outside of the vehicle, not anything internally with who's in the vehicle, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's actually well vetted. I won't do it any justice compared to what they can do to explain it, but I've sat through that a couple times, and they do have from what I've seen in the different platforms that are out there, they have a really good team assembled to make sure that those things are in consideration all the time.
And then I'll get my last one. Can you talk about, again, I'm new to some of this, so just want to make sure I'm starting to understand a little bit. Can you talk about some of the overlaps with the county, with North Dakota Highway Patrol, with BCI? When we're talking about, especially the investigation side, making sure that, I assume that there's overlaps there that are occurring. So, drug task force for one, if you're looking at internet crimes, how do those interactions work? And what are the expectations of those entities for what you'll bring to the table?
Yeah, so one of the things that especially on the narcotics side, we make sure that we have, we've tried to focus our attention on the drug task force because there is a significant issue, not only in our community, but in other communities. You know, it's right now we have 4 allocated, we have 2 of those positions filled. But that's kind of what we've seen across the board. For a while, the sheriff's office has 2 positions, they didn't have any filled. So, I mean, it kind of ebbs and flows, and we try to supplement that where we can. So our investigators are actually assigned to our investigations division. So they can pull from that resource too if they need additional people to serve a search warrant, help with an operation. They can just pull from our investigators. We have 1 officer assigned to the ATF task force. So it's basically a violent crimes assistance. So it gives us some authority to use that federal power to accomplish some of our investigations. Also gives them a little bit of kind of an inside loop to get different things accomplished through having ATF assist us. So, you know, I think over the years, the one thing that there's never really been a strong presence of in North Dakota has been DEA. So you'll hear a lot of talk about, you know, DEA task force and having them involved in drug investigations. For Minot, we see more of the HSI connection. So you have more Homeland Security involved in that. I think the one thing that's good about Minot is we all work well together. You know, if we need something from the Highway Patrol during the state fair, we'll ask them, hey, can you afford to give us anybody to help with traffic? And they'll do that if they can afford to do that. Ward County, we have a good relationship with Ward County, so if they need assistance, they know they can call us. And likewise, if we have too much going on in Minot and we can't handle it all, or we have a big incident, we'll just say, hey, can you take some of this stuff while we deal with this? And they're always willing to step up. So I think that the most important part when we're talking about personnel shortages is we're not the only ones short, so we all have to lean on each other a little bit. And being able to have those relationships in place before you need them is important. So I think that's the best way to answer that is I've never asked anybody for help and not gotten it. So for Minot, I think that's where we're ahead of what some other agencies face.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
At this time, Chief, are you ready to go, Chief Kelly? Are you ready to go? Would you be willing to go at 9:30? Okay, so we'll take a 12-minute break and we'll reconvene at 9:30 for the fire department budget presentation.